Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Decisions. And today is a very special episode, and you might already agree because nobody is sitting here. And that has a very simple reason. The interview, the conversation we're going to show you today was recorded a few months ago when I happened to spend some time in Singapore. I had the chance to talk to Dr. Nellie Seng, who is the head of keyboard at NAFA Academy. And I'd like to apologize a little bit because I did not have this wonderful team around and this beautiful equipment. It was just me with one camera and my mobile phone. But nevertheless, I really wanted to start an interview series. I called it Backstage at that time. The title Decisions wasn't yet born. But I hope that you will enjoy the conversation as much as I did. So here we go, Decisions episode 0. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this episode of Backstage. My name is Cibis, and I'm very happy to be here with Dr. Nellie Seng, a pianist and educator here from Singapore. We are actually in Singapore. And well, thank you very much for being here, our guest.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. First of all, actually, I should correct myself because you're not our guests. We are your guests because this is your space. This is your music studio. We see the two wonderful grand pianos behind us, about which we surely will talk as well later on.
My babies.
Yes, exactly. But let me start by asking, if you look at your life as a performer, what is the kind of crucial moment why you love doing it? What excites you most about this life?
Surprisingly, I think it's actually the learning process, the discovery itself, and not so much the final product, because there's no such thing as perfection, is there? And so it's that continuous journey of evolution also that keeps me going.
But what moment is it if you really think of a certain performance? Is there a moment where the kind of joyful anticipation changes into nervousness? Or is that something which bothers you, or do you actually embrace stage fright? Or do you not have it at all? Is that a big issue of that life, or is it a certain moment on stage, like the ending of the last piece or the beginning of the first? If you really think in like the concrete event.
I live and breathe for the first note, I think. Not the last, but the first note. Stage fright, would it be terrible of me to say that I don't actually get that?
It's amazing. Yeah,
well, here's the thing. It's because I think at the age in my early 20s, and this also applies to tension issues. I'm not saying that I don't have them now per se, but you know how us pianists and even instrumentalists, we see a lot of students now being in very physically locked up when they play, and that to them is their idea of control, and that if they do not do that, they won't be able to control their fingers. But it's the exact opposite, isn't it? So in my very early 20s, just as I was transitioning from teenagehood to adulthood, I came to the realization that these two aspects of performance wasn't doing me any good. So with tension, again, it's about that whole learning process of finding out which moments in the piece itself will allow you that fraction of time to unlock and carry on. And then with stage fright, of course, I get little moments of panic and all that. But the thing is, I acknowledge that fear, and I say, now I let you go. Because it doesn't do anything for me. It doesn't do anyone any good, because all you're going to get is this flustered state, and then everything, I guess something magical can come out of that moment. But honestly speaking, you lose, the finesse, or not that I have the finesse to start with, but you lose that sense of control to create the beauty that you have worked for. So it's about, I know you're there, but I'm okay with it, and you can now go. Yeah.
Have you always been like that, even before starting music? You've never had any, even in your earlier childhood? How old were you when you started with the piano?
4.
Okay.
Yeah.
So early, yeah.
Yeah. No, I've had moments. No, definitely not. Up to Yeah, as I said, early 20s. I definitely dealt with that, sometimes to the point that I would get terrible stomach aches before going onto stage and panicking, and literally my left foot especially would be shaking, or even the right actually. Yeah, both. That they would be shaking like a leaf.
Yeah. But you would overcome that very quickly. You never had moments where you were so relaxed and you go on stage, you play even as a teenager or so, and then things got worse? Or would it always be that you were first maybe nervous, but then once you're actually at the piano and you start playing?
No. It would just fluctuate. I could never pinpoint when.
Okay.
In a way, when I would get nervous and all that, but it was a conscious decision, and I think in my 20s to not be nervous anymore. Yeah, this is something that I do tell my students, that it's a mental warfare. What we do in a way is a mental warfare. Why do you allow physical tension and fear to control you? Yeah.
That is the hardest. Since
no one believes me though.
Yeah. But it's the hardest to understand, I find, and also to communicate that in the end, the battle is all in our head.
Yeah.
We always are afraid of playing wrong notes when we face the audience, but they are least worried about that.
Right.
They come to enjoy music, to have a wonderful evening. They come with the most positive expectations.
Exactly.
And want to see on stage. They forgive us anyway so much more than we think, if everything else is genuine. And we really try to make music.
The thing is, do you agree that mistakes do happen?
Of course.
Yeah, but I think students, especially, are unable to accept that.
Yes, but I see two reasons. Is a certain expectation culture in education system.
Yeah.
Whenever it's something is institutionalized, there has to be a certain way of organizing rewards, organizing reviews, and have a certain list of criteria. And then this, I think, is a very human trait that we come to that point, oh, that was better than that, there was less wrong notes. And I remember someone, when I studied, saying, I don't understand why I didn't get the first prize, I played no mistake.
Right.
And of course, that's a misunderstanding of what the real challenge is.
Right.
And the other aspect I see is recordings, because they are so perfect.
But maybe that's when we really need to talk about what happens backstage.
That's true.
Ooh, was that note really right, or was that fixed, But then again, it's about right notes being something tangible. Once you get that absolutely right, you think, okay, that's it, isn't it? But then again, here's the thing, I think, especially from an educator's point of view, there are two types of mistakes or wrong notes. One is a genuine slip, and I think the second, which is more unforgivable, is the practice methods. In that learning process, how did you practice? Did you consciously try to fix those so-called mistakes, or did you perfect the mistakes by simply repeating it, many, many times? So I think as professionals, we can tell what type of mistake it is, and I think that's the more important question that we have to ask.
In the end, then, it's about being honest to yourself.
Yeah.
When practicing.
Yeah.
Because the slips are also those mistakes which every audience immediately forgives you.
Right.
They don't even, if they hear them at all.
Right.
But those when you don't make the effort, when you don't see the problem, when you're ignorant to what's on the page, or when you actually misread something and that becomes a habit.
Yeah, exactly.
Then that is less forgivable. I totally agree. When going back a little bit to your beginning, how did you choose, or was it for you always clear that piano is your instrument and you wanted to do music as a profession? When did that kind of manifest for yourself?
Well, if I may maybe kind of point to the whole culture of upbringing in a way, and I think it perhaps may be more common when I was growing up, is that everyone took music lessons. It was almost like a rite of passage. And I think actually it still is now, and it's almost as if at the age of 10, once you hit double digits, you stop. Because exams will take priority, and because here in Singapore we have this thing called the primary school leaving examinations, and that happens around age 12, what we call primary 6. And as students start to prepare for that, like a competition almost, certain things have to give. And the first thing to get kicked out is this thing.
I see.
But then again, things have also changed over the years that the government in a way and the education ministry has tried to implement a more holistic way of education, and that they see these enrichment as being an important part of life, bringing, an added dimension of how should I say this? Of inspiration, perhaps, But the problem is that, again, as you were talking about the whole aspect of certain expectations and standards of getting the notes right, students use music as one of those bonus point type things to help them get into a better school, or that if they do not hit a certain point in their exam, like if they only got a 75, this piano or any other sort of instrumental study will help them add the next 5 points that will enable them to get into a school of their choice. So it's become a double-edged sword in a way. And I don't think the reasons for learning the instrument or even pursuing music as in the sense is the correct one. Yeah.
But do you see a certain advantage maybe of that culture, if that's the right word? Like, does it also maybe form an audience for those who really want to go into that profession? Does that have that side effect? Or do you think they really forget about it and do they really come back to it after, maybe once they have their families and they've established their own professional life?
Here's the thing, and I think here's the sad part that I have seen in the past 10 years. There are more and more competitions that are being held. There are more and more participation for these competitions. But unfortunately, do you also see that the audience rate has gone down? We used to see halls being filled, people make it an event. I'm preparing for this competition. I'm going to go watch this competition. But these days, competition is just, another thing on the schedule that I have to go for. As in, you send the child to this competition, they play, and then they leave. And who's in the hall? Actually, only the adjudicators. And it's not because, this is pre-pandemic. Of course, now we're not going to allow anybody in. But before the pandemic, audience rate was so low. It made me question, what are you doing this for? And that made me really sad about, the future of music. And we organize competitions and also a piano academy at NAFA. And it's sometimes sad to have, participants email us or something and say, can you change the time, please? It clashes with my other class or something. Yeah. And it makes you wonder the relevance and the importance of so-called competition or music in general. It's only just a little blip in life now.
Has it changed? Was it different before?
Very different, very different.
Like when you were young, you would sit there and take it as a chance to compare yourself, to learn from the other participants.
Yes, absolutely. We would make a trip. Maybe I shouldn't say this, but I will. My music was always very important to me, and I had a very supportive uncle who made it, in a way, his life to expose me to music and to, performance events and things like that. And he would look out for things to bring me to like lunchtime concerts and things like that. And he would actually tell me beforehand, okay, right, such and such a time today, okay, we'll go to this concert, but I have school. It's okay. Fake a stomach ache. And so I would be there, he said, I'll be ready at whatever time. I'll try and pick you up then. So at about 11:30, You go to sick bay, you tell your teachers, oh, I'm really sick. Oh, can I call my family? Oh, I need to go home. Okay, so I don't feel well, blah, blah, blah. So my other, aspect of performing arts comes to play, the actress. And then, so I would just fake this whole thing and then go home and off we go to watch a concert.
Wonderful. That's...
Don't judge me. But yeah, that was life then. That was 30 years ago.
It probably was the right investment. I mean, what would you remember now of the lessons you might have attended in school?
Right. And that to me is a part of my growing up and memories that inspires me, and people don't do that now. They would actually say, I have this, I will go, but the thing is after that, they would just simply go off to something else.
Somehow I always think that the effort you make also impacts the reward you get.
Yeah.
So if you really make an effort, either this way, or by going. I remember going to a youth competition and I spent the whole week there and listened to basically everyone, at least in my age group, to learn. I was really soaking all these experiences and they're sweating on stage, so to speak.
It's a different sense of commitment.
Yeah, and you would also meet and mingle.
Yes.
You would make friendships.
That's the thing. That's the important thing. I think people are missing out these days. It's not a friendship that they're cultivating musically, but it's an unhealthy sense of comparison. I don't want to use the word competition right now, but I think it's comparison. In
that age then, because to this day, some of my closest friends I met as a teenager in competitions.
Right.
Or in master classes and workshops.
In that circuit.
Yeah, because you have such a common ground of interest.
Right, yeah.
And we would listen all night to recordings and basically share with each other our favorite pianists or favorite recordings of the pieces.
But that's the other thing. You're saying listening to recordings. But in this day and age, if I may just kind of derail a little bit, people no longer listen, they watch.
True. If they at all have time.
Right. Because I had a parent say this to me a few months ago, and they were lovely parent. I think she might have played an instrument herself. She said, kids these days, they don't listen to music, they watch music because it's on YouTube.
It's always YouTube.
So the ears are actually turned off, and it's such a paradox in a way because things are so much more accessible now, and yet I think as humans, we are closed off in that sense.
Do you also think that actually watching it instead of listening has a bit of a too big impact in how then students try to play things?
Absolutely, yeah. Because the thing is, they're more aware, they're more concerned with the dramaticism of, what they see and how they do, but they're not thinking about what the consequence of those actions are. And so that's actually something that I'm very much focused on these days with my own pedagogy. And recently I've actually implemented, this is an experiment in a way, but we have weekly performance classes in NAFA. And for some of the performance class, this was for giggles really, but it was actually quite fascinating. I had my colleagues put up a black screen like you would during blind auditions for orchestras and all that, so that we don't, base on gender, race or age or whatever. So I had students play behind the black screen. The shock factor of the player, the performer themselves, I have to play behind a black screen. And then, okay, but the funny thing is, two sides of the coin here. They act differently because they don't have to act it out. And the students go, okay, what do you hear? Oh, it was very bland or something. I said, so you mean you didn't see a crescendo? You're right. So the listening changed because the thing is now everything else has been taken away and they can only listen. And then for the student behind the screen playing, they no longer have to act in a way and they really have to focus on what they are doing and to project that image as a sound. So it changes everything. And I will continue to do that.
I totally agree. You really have to put the energy in the sound. And it makes it too easy,
right.
In a way. You convince people too easily without actually doing it in the sound. And also, I find that I've seen comments a lot that students then say, when I teach, I ask a lot of questions, and many are not used to that. It's asking, so why do you think you make this movement or that movement? And then, because Lang Lang in the video does this, or Zhu Zhang does that, or whomever they see.
Right.
And they obviously are not experienced enough in that age to actually kind of reverse engineer back, so to speak, why they might make that movement,
right.
But that is not the technical foundation.
Right.
So they have a technical foundation which is independent from that, if they're good pianists. And then maybe they can cope with some habits they put on top.
Right, exactly.
And some people, I think it's the way of dealing with the pressure, with the amount of concerts they play and so on. It's a completely different challenge on that level. But they think they need to make this movement in order to have a crescendo, to make the note expressive, and then they create the physical habit, although it has nothing to do with good technique.
Yeah. Or even just a slur. Boom, they do this. It clips the sound. It changes the angle, but they never think that.
Yeah.
It's hard.
When talking a bit about your own education, so growing up in Singapore, in those times doing music, we heard a little bit about the whole connotations about that. How did you find your teachers? Were your parents already a bit connected, or was it try and error, or how consciously did you choose, or did they find you?
This is pre-internet, isn't it?
Yes, I guess.
I mean, as a kid, and I think it's still similar now. We start off with these group classes. I mean, I was sent to those group classes, and, I progressed along the way. And then you started one-to-one lessons within the school. And if you had more interest or stuff like that, you ask around, perhaps, who's a good teacher. And because since we were interested, of course, also in concerts and competitions, we would actually, I think how my uncle found my teacher then was that he went to ask who their teacher was, and then, track them down that way. Then after that, this teacher of mine, who is my boss now actually, Miss Nina Ching, the Vice Dean of NAFA, is that she persuaded my parents to make the very brave decision, and it's a heavy decision too, to send me away to England when I was, at 12 or 13. Straight after my school leaving examination. So as I was going into middle school, I went to England, and I went to a boarding school instead, a specialist music school. And also that teacher there came by recommendation through my then teacher's teacher. I mean, long story. It's always about the 6 degrees of separation in some way. And then after that, how do I find teachers? Again, it's thinking about then, okay, we know who, we Google, we think about, the styles and things like that.
I was just going to ask, is it about how much do you know about their teaching style? Do you focus on what is your strength in regard to the teacher's reputation? Or do you focus on your weakness and say, okay, this is actually, I haven't really been exposed to, this is where I would like to improve, certain repertoire specialist or repertoire choices, or how does that come about?
A little bit of both, I think. And I think also as an older teenager, perhaps I think we have to respect and acknowledge that it's a trial and error situation, and that can happen. I think, once we've made that decision to study with a certain teacher, that we allow it time for a relationship to develop, and for you to adjust, for the student to adjust to a different method of teaching. And that I think there should always be discussion. I mean, there should be faith, I think, and trust first, to allow the teacher to guide you. And then after that there can be discussion. And I mean, if things really is not working, then, I think we must all respect each other enough to allow for, a change, a switch to happen as well.
It sounds as if you had to do that with the teacher. Did you have to?
I have had to do that. Yeah.
I think it's an experience we all go through at some point or another. But I think it's very important what you say, that we first have to give it time.
Yes.
You cannot just after 4 lessons say, oh, this is not for me.
Yeah, right.
Because there's so much going on, and no many teachers are so experienced, and they really need time to adjust also to you as a person, to get to know you. You've known yourself for the whole life, and they've known you for maybe 2 weeks. And,
But sometimes, I think as teachers, we also have said, the student doesn't know themselves.
True. From our perspective.
Right.
Yeah, it's that's very true. You went to Chetham, right?
I did.
In Manchester. Had you been to England before?
No.
There?
I mean, for the audition.
Oh, I see. So you had to travel there for the audition.
Yeah. Oh, that was, pre-internet days. Right.
Okay. Had you considered somewhere else in Europe, or was already from the Singapore perspective, how do you compare for education in music, the whole scene, Europe versus England versus the States? Is there a generalization possible?
Well, for me, it was because of the English language.
Okay, sure, of course. Yeah, okay, that is of course one factor, especially in that age.
Right. But then again, you see, here's the thing. After I graduated Chetham's, I did toy with the idea of going to Moscow.
Okay.
Yeah. And of course, again, what stopped me was, oh God, Russian. So that was I do think about what life would have been like, if I did take that road. I mean, I didn't even audition, but it's just that whole thing about learning Russian scared me. Yeah, because I had already struggled with 2 other European languages. I wasn't, going to butcher it.
Was the thought of going to Russian? I read your one teacher, Jablonskaya,
yes,
that's her name, yeah. And McLaughlin also has a certain right pronunciation.
Yeah, McLaughlin.
And he was playing a lot of Russian repertoire, a lot of late romantic repertoire, and then another Russian teacher. Was that also a factor of considering going to Russia? Was it a certain special interest in your?
Well, because I've always had this affinity with Russian music.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a huge passion of mine, especially Nikolai Medtner. The Russian Brahms, as they call him. So that was why we thought about Russia. But we also, at that point, I also auditioned for the royal schools, the different royal schools in England, and then also some schools in America. But I just thought at that point, a change of scenery might be nice. Yeah. But I think in retrospect, I don't think I was matured enough to handle New York. So the first few years there was a bit of time wasted, but a lot of growing up. Let's just put it that way.
Time wasting.
No, it's life experience that I've chalked up, in that sense. But on the educational, perspective kind of thing, time wasted.
Yeah, but it goes, okay.
It goes
so you went, just to explain, you went to Juilliard?
Yes, I did.
And did both of your degrees there, right?
Yeah,
the undergrad and
master's
degree. But education is in German we have the saying, either you're a student or you're studying. It translates a bit badly from German, but what it means is like, okay, you can be enrolled as a student and then you're actually doing the student work, or so you're studying, or you're enrolled as a student and you're growing up. You're going through the experience of living alone for the first time,
right? Being
responsible for your time and how you use it day and night, and you grow up also in your communication skills with your peers, and you become a person more independent from your parents in your childhood.
Right.
And it's meant humorously, but then of course there's a serious core to it. And when you go on stage, you're there as a personality, not just as a pianist,
right,
in a technical sense. So I wouldn't call it a waste of time.
No, not at all. But the thing is, I did pay, my debt, my dues later on, and again, it's about acknowledging your flaws also, and I did that. So after I graduated from my master's, I actually put myself back in so-called pre-college or continuous education at the Pianist School, and that's also in Manhattan. So Pianist has always had this reputation of being very strong in theory and especially in Schenker analyses. So I put myself in there in one of those programs for serious learners but not professionals, and also in pre-college type courses for a year or maybe slightly even more, just to learn all those, to study things that I did not, take very seriously when, I was doing my bachelor's degree. And those years were some of the best in my life, because I think finally I was matured enough to appreciate things. And that also changed me as a musician completely, because I finally started thinking about music seriously from the composer's point of view and things like that, and not just about me, the pianist. So I cherish those memories immensely.
Does it have something to do with the type of students around you? Because they were less performance oriented?
No, because, I think I'll admit to the fact that I'm in a way a loner, being a pianist and all that, you tend to keep to yourself. But I was really hungry for knowledge at that point, and to kind of make back the time that I thought I did waste, and I loved every moment of that. Yeah.
How would you describe to a non-musician, a non-performer, what the responsibility is as a performer? I like talking a little bit about what actually is interpretation, what is the role of the performer in relation, as I say, to the composer, to the piece and the audience in this triangle.
Right. To be true to the composer's intent, because again, that kind of, we have to think that, there are two types of players out there. There are those who enjoy music, who play music as a form of relaxation and to de-stress. And then there are the professional musicians who seek to convey the composer's intent, to be, the messenger, so to speak. So I think once we decide to take on that route as the professional musician, the messenger, the conduit, then we have a different role to play. That what we do must be informed, and it's not about us. There is personal expression, but I think it has to be within a context and with constraints around it. Whereas, I think we should be judged differently for it. And that in a way, there's a certain lack of freedom but then it is, I think, our challenge to find that freedom within that context. Whereas if we were the leisure player, it doesn't matter how they perform that piece. I mean, they give concerts, and I think I do enjoy it as well, because I see the love that they have for it. But the thing is then, the stylistic lines perhaps blur. Yeah.
I understand what you mean. I sometimes am amazed. No, let's put it this way. I think we should explore a little bit how little leeway we actually have. I think people misconceive a lot how free we are, how artistic and creative our job is as a performer. I'm talking solely now about the job as a performer playing classical music on stage. Because if you play a Beethoven sonata or Chopin piece, the expectations are quite defined.
Yes.
From the notes you play in the right order and more or less in the right speed, and then there is so little, in a way, perceivable for most, personal freedom in how you phrase it, how you organize certain dynamics, how you approach the sound. Then certain things you cannot change because you are who you are.
Right.
I have my sound. I cannot just simply imitate Horowitz or Richter that easily. And maybe it would even be the wrong approach to try that.
Right.
It's quite an athletic challenge to fulfill these expectations at a certain day, at a certain time. This is the stressful performance aspect of it. Then just people say, "Oh, you're musicians. Oh, I would love to have a creative job." And then they think, well, what are you doing? Well, I'm a lawyer. Well, I think your job is as creative, if not even more. Maybe not as a pilot or as a surgeon, you shouldn't be that creative.
Right.
But in other jobs, there's so much more leeway. And they're not really aware of it sometimes, or they have a misconception of what they have to do.
I mean, in a way, if I looked at this from a teacher's point of view, what do we expect from the students? You know, I mean, okay, notes aside, but all these very micro details like the articulations and all that, when executed perfectly, not say perfectly, but you know, to the T, it sounds so different. You know, it's like, I think one of my pet peeves is we have 4 notes. Slur 2 notes, staccato 2 notes. What do students commonly do?
They probably slur 3.
That's right.
Yeah.
But it's a different flavor, isn't it? It's da instead of da. But I don't understand why they slur 3 and then dot the last one. But it is so difficult
It's true.
It's so difficult
I think
to
they
slur
most
too.
they see the dot as how they end the note. They see the dot as shortening the note, which they refer to just as at the ending. But they don't see that it means separation. Also from the previous one.
But then they keep saying, I said, no, you did not do that. I did. But they don't seem to even hear or to realize the fact that they're not. And that is one of my pet peeves. But then this is what we're talking about, the difficulty of the job and how little, you know, creative leeway that we have, because we have to execute that. You know, as written. Beethoven was so strict about his compositions that he burnt everything, right? I mean, those that were considered imperfections and not what he wanted, and that even, let's say, first editions published in his life, in the second edition there would be changes because he's like, oh, that's not what I wrote, or something. He was particular. So to fulfill that vision for him, that's our job. But where's the creativity? Sure, but that is something that, you know, people don't see, is that we have to realize that first.
Would you then say our job isn't actually that creative? Or do you see the creativity in something else than most people would think?
I see my job as being understanding something. Less creative, but to understand. Yeah.
So there might be creative ways of doing your work, of practicing, of keeping up the motivation, of
creative fingering.
All that, yes. And I often get the question, isn't it boring to always play the same pieces? Why? As meant to me as an individual, but also as a whole approach for the scene, for classical music. Why do we play pieces which are 200 years old, and why do we still cherish them so much? Should we not just focus on what is written now, not necessarily pop culture, but since that was more or less the contemporary music, maybe even pop culture of that time, if you think of Vivaldi.
Absolutely.
Composers who were very successful in their time.
But that's something that students don't understand, that they were pop culture of their time. And if only they can place themselves in that so-called position, then perhaps they would understand music better, you know, with that different lens to it. Because they still see it as being fuddy-duddy, you know, classical music is elitist, blah, blah, blah.
But they still want to play it. And people often don't see that, in the end, that musical language is still what we have all around us all the time. Whether it's pop music, whether it's film music, whether it's, unless you're really going to avant-garde classical contemporary music or very experimental stuff where you leave the kind of harmonic language. And it's just about rhythm or sounds and so on, maybe then you could argue it's not. So it's basically not even dead. It's all around us all the time.
Back to where's the creativity in our job? I think you're right in saying that, you know, it's in that process that we get to be creative. How many different ways can we find to do this? And through that, you know, finding different ways of understanding what we do and ourselves as well in that process. And how can we create that sound? In this context, in that context, on this piano, in that hall, I think that's the creativity. And then through that exploration, maybe finding something new to add to, our palette itself as well.
So in a way, creativity is not about the result, but about the process.
Yeah.
To go through the same process in different ways, same as in we play the same notes and so on, but it's always different because of the circumstances we are, especially if we tour.
Yeah.
Have your expectations, or have the expectations, how can I say, have you changed your expectations since you started teaching more about, were you expecting from yourself different things, let's say when you were 20, than you do now from the 20-year-old students? Regarding this process. The ability to make decisions and so on.
I think this is a double-edged sword again. I expect them to do more things because information is so much more accessible. But because of this information being so accessible and all the distractions all around, I think in a way I've had to lower expectations and do a little bit more hand-holding than I would like to. To try and steer them and say, okay, guys, let's not look there, let's just stay on track a little bit more. Yeah, so I think adjustments have to be made accordingly to, generate, in a way, generational gaps as well. And, the new, more modern way of life, yeah.
When you teach, how much are you in charge about what the students are working on regarding the repertoire choice? How much freedom do you give them, or how much?
Well, I think in an institution, with students and all that, and so-called syllabus, I think at the end of the day, what we are trying to do is to expose them to the rules of different styles, and that they learn these things as students, and it's almost like a fact-finding expedition, that they find out who they are, what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are, and what suits them musically or something, and to give them enough information that's, in their own future as teachers, also as performer teachers, that they are able to still be able to, distill that information, that knowledge down to the next generation, that we must put enough information, as much as we can, there first. So in terms of repertoire, I think they need to have everything, a little bit of everything, at least the, the basic understanding. So that's, I think, a requirement, at least. Okay, so let's say, okay, you have to have these boxes. Now go fill them up. Yeah. So certain sense of freedom there.
Okay, I understand. I remember when I studied, I had pedagogical psychology, and I learned, I found it very helpful in understanding myself, especially the aspect of, they called it, whether you're positively or negatively motivated when practicing. Meaning, are you someone who embraces the challenge and practices because you also want to take the risk and you go for the success, so to speak, of the process, not a specific result? Or are you someone who gets more motivated to practice in order to avoid mistakes? I discovered that when I work with students, or I feel a certain change even myself, that it's helpful to kind of understand where the precondition lies, maybe the tendency of motivation. Right. I don't know if that is a concept which you ever came across. And my question would be, would that influence the degree of difficulty you set for a certain student in regard to the piece you give or you suggest? Because I think that would maybe have an influence on that.
Yeah.
If you go for the challenge, you can probably push the difficulty a bit more. Someone who avoids mistakes and maybe also more easily tenses up physically, you would rather, just go to the top of what is not easily reachable, but what doesn't stress them.
Well, students come to us from all different walks of life and also different levels of ability as well. I think what's more important is that it's not the level of difficulty of, say, a program necessarily, because I think even, let's say, Mozart's, Twinkle Twinkle Variations is so hard to play well, but, people often think that it's so easy or something. I think at the end of the day, what's important is that it must be played well. Rather than, the actual so-called level of technical difficulty or something, because something that is less demanding, technically speaking, can be so musically demanding.
Oh yeah, but I mean, in a way I meant that including that. I also think that the less notes, the more difficult, because the more each note counts.
Right. It's like that one's worth more points
yeah,
now.
it's because every mistake is audible and every misphrasing is audible.
But the whole, the idea of positive or negative, what was the word you used?
Well, motivation. What drives the motivation?
Right. At the end of the day, it's about how you can nurture a sense of confidence in the student, isn't it? So that, in a way, is the process to that. So understanding that, because the thing is, especially I think in the first year, in the first concert that they, perform in the school and all that, it's about at least giving them a positive experience, because again, it's a getting to know each other process to begin with. How do they deal with a not so positive outcome, let's say. So again, you just want to kind of nurture them and to get them to enjoy the process and the effect, and through the way guide them along and say that sometimes it's okay to fail as well. And they have to actually learn that. It's nothing's going to be smooth sailing all the way. So I think it's still a combination of both.
When starting to learn a piece, how could you describe in a few sentences how you do it, how you did it maybe a few years as a student, how you would do it now, and what of that impacts what you demand from students? It's like, is there a certain procedure you go through? Do you first just spend a day or 2 days just reading the music and listening to recordings? Do you avoid that?
I avoid
it. Do
it.
you play just very slowly and just get an overview of the piece, to play very slowly, or do you work just on one page or a certain chapter? And then is there a certain habit you have?
Personally, the unfortunate truth is that I've always been a strong sight reader. So that aspect of putting things together has always been easy for me. And I've known students who are not such good readers, and there are some who even learn by ear in that sense. Their reading skills are not so strong, and that has to be kind of padded by the whole oral thing. I do encourage students to avoid listening first, because I just would not like them to have preconceived ideas about a piece, because now they tend to just, again, YouTube, let's do this. Then where's the originality and creativity from? And then, of course, these days with YouTube, there's such varying standards these days. And because if you have an ad, yours comes out first, and we don't even get to the good stuff, the good recordings. So if they're listening to whatever pops out first because they are not able to discern yet, then they're actually essentially listening to all the wrong things as well. So I tend to, persuade them and say, okay, right, just go and sit down, look at this, and, after a few days you have managed to get a certain shape out of it, then listen.
Did you do that when you were 18, 20?
Not listen?
Did you have the discipline to not listen to the piece?
Yeah.
Wow.
No, because I could sight read most things,
okay.
Unfortunately.
Not even out of curiosity to have, I guess, in CDs in those times, Spotify didn't exist.
Right, so it wasn't so accessible for us to begin with.
Well, yes, you would need to commit to a few recordings more strongly.
Right. Usually I'm like, Oh, because I'm a romantic to begin with. So usually I tend to overly romanticize things, especially, when I was younger. Not like now when I think, Beethoven, yeah, right, this is what it means, the accent, blah, 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 blah. But in those days it was different. And usually I go, oh gosh. It's like, ooh, I'm really far off.
Would you then allow listening to recordings at a later point? Would you guide students to
absolutely, because again, now that it's accessible, I want them to listen to, sorry for saying this, someone dead, someone alive, someone not as established or something, to have a variety. But again, I think setting them certain rules and standards of what they listen to in order to, I think, cultivate that palette for them.
Yeah, I understand. So it's also really important to listen to different generations of pianists.
Absolutely, yeah.
I remember when I got to know like Backhaus or Ignaz Friedman or these kind of pianists, I had not heard of until my 20s, because my first teacher wasn't really so interested in the old recordings, and then I had another teacher who was very fascinated by those very old times, and so you realize a completely different sense of a late 19th century approach to interpretation, which maybe only was known to me by Rubinstein and Horowitz, but nothing older.
Yeah. And to also couple that with reading, so to understand their execution, because like Newman and all that, there's so much material out there. And actually now, again, coming back to the whole point of accessibility, all these books are available as PDF copies and all that, but yet no one's actually digging for information anymore.
Yeah. Do you think with the streaming, the YouTube and streaming services, this commitment thing to certain recordings is an advantage or disadvantage? The accessibility to more
disadvantage.
Easily? Okay.
Disadvantage. We could almost turn this and look at children and any sort of electronic device these days. You go out, you see all these kids out eating, they all have a phone. I made a very conscious decision to take that away from my own kid. Yeah, so I'm very proud that he's able to have a meal with nothing. He can have a book, or a toy or something, but no YouTube, no phone, no iPad. Because what I realized with him was that he was always flipping through stuff. And it's the same with students when they listen. They don't listen to the whole thing.
Yeah.
And sometimes also you have to ask yourself, do you get to hear the whole thing? No, there's always an ad somewhere as well.
It's true.
So that just ruins everything as well. Yeah. And then they say, okay, I really only just want to find out this part. So they start scrubbing forward. So, it's not just about they don't listen, but it cultivates a sense of, there's a lack of patience also. The attention span is being affected in general. Not just for, I think musicians or anything, but I think the world.
Exactly. And also students misunderstand the amount of time it takes to learn something.
Right.
Because of this instant.
Instant gratification, and also the fact that they're starting to, or not starting to, but they are taking things out of context. A lot.
Cherry picking. Even just movements.
Yeah. And then what do you get at the end of the day, Frankenstein?
Coming back to the beginning, that is probably something one has to really stress to parents and to people who make decisions about education systems and cultural funding, that this is an activity which trains us to have the ability for delayed gratification, to persist through a certain learning process before you expect something from it. That is probably very important. I would like to talk briefly about the impact, of course, of COVID and all the policies related to that. Has your outlook on this profession been changed to that, and how you talk with students about their possible future, their expectations? And maybe to start with, what is the expectation of most of the students who actually study at college level at NAFA?
They all say, most of them anyway, I want to perform, and all that. And I think with COVID and with technology these days, I think it has opened up the world. You know, they can all be in a way performers now. But I think we have to hold ourselves to a standard and ask ourselves, to what level? You know, and to use that to push ourselves, you know, to work harder and to be more honest about our craft. But what I feel is dangerous now is with everything going online, everything is a video submission, nothing is so-called live anymore. They don't know what it is to perform live and to do things only once and to live with that.
Mm.
Do you understand what I mean by living with that? Because they keep going and thinking, I'm going to play now, I'm going to record. If I don't like it, I'll do it again. But it's not being about in the moment anymore. So they're not training themselves, I think, in the right way in that sense. And I keep telling students these days more and more, this whole thing will come to an end. You know, don't get used to it. Because, you know, I have students asking me questions like, how many times do you think I should record? I'm like, yeah, once. And I hold myself to that same standard. Because, I mean, my personal credo is that, you know, if I expect someone else to do something, I have to be able to do that myself. And so it's a one-time recording, you give it everything, and that's it. You don't pace yourself saying, okay, let me just do a bit less or something. Because the thing is, honestly speaking, if you're going in to record something, you've recorded it multiple times, which take do you actually choose most of the time, statistically speaking? Because I've asked my students this.
I don't know. For me, probably I would say the second. But
right.
Maybe because the first one is for me a warm-up, but then I should rather not even record it. And then concentration goes down, and in the end you just try to...
But
you misconceive,
right.
You misconceive how bad something was or how much you can actually do it better, whatever that means.
But it's usually the first or the second that they take. It's really quite uncommon to say the last few or something. So I mean, what lesson do we actually take from that? You know, what do we learn? That first time, okay, you give usually. I mean, what you know, I've heard from other musicians and from students is musically, it's the most convincing, it's the strongest.
Yeah.
Second one, they choose because it's cleaner.
Exactly.
That's what they say. Yeah. So it's either or. If we can have a hybrid of the first two, yay, bravo. But no one really chooses, you know, those takes after that. And that says something. And I think students need to appreciate that and to learn from that. So why waste your energy? Why not just channel everything and just live in that moment? You know, it's almost saying like, you know, YOLO, you only live once. But again, training students, I think these days, to not bank on recording and, you know, everything being a video submission. I think there is definitely a learning process from the video submission thing. You know, you learn by watching yourself, understanding, you know, the whole two sides of the coin type thing. But to not get used to the idea of everything just being online anymore.
Yeah.
But I don't think, you know, performing arts necessarily needs to live in that dimension, that we need to go back.
Yeah, we also need the energy of the audience,
right?
Because they impact. That is also part of this creative process, because you get the atmosphere of the whole, the energy of them. You can feel whether they're just, you know, there's one person who doesn't like the piece or your approach.
Right.
You can feel it, even if there are 500 people in the hall.
Yeah. The vibe.
And exactly, and that impacts. You can also not. I always say, not 1,000 hours can substitute one performance.
Yeah.
Or hours of practicing, because what you learn on stage you cannot practice.
Right.
You cannot do in the practice room. And the experience of playing a piece for the 5th or 10th time is also something any recording process can't give us.
Right.
The how it grows, how you better become with it as a performer through the experience.
Right. Because it's a scary thing to now explain to students. Is like, I mean, to be to be supportive, you tell them, oh, I mean, there are more people, hopefully, you know, watching you behind their screens instead. But, kind of sorry, I've kind of lost myself there. But the issue is that I think people listen differently now, because when you're behind a screen, they tend to be multitasking as well.
Yeah, I'm not there.
Right. You know,
And also, they probably do the same as we do, or students do. They listen to the first 30 seconds and then think, oh yeah, nice piece.
Even if it's a
Oh,
live
he's doing
stream,
well.
I can walk away and go to the bathroom.
Yeah.
You know, or something. But I don't want to tell the students that. And, you know, telling them there are more people that can listen to you, or, you know, you're still live. It's such a difficult thing to explain these days, you know, the difference of live pre-pandemic and...
It's the commitment as well.
Yeah,
It's the commitment from the audience, which gives a certain energy.
Right.
Because they also intuitively want the reward.
Right.
And they get the reward because they make the effort to go to the hall, to sit down there, to go through the procedure, to buy a ticket. And also to buy something makes you committed.
Right,
It's
absolutely.
as
Yeah.
banal as it might be. As we were more committed to the CDs or recordings we bought because we spent $20, $30 on a CD, and we bloody listened to the whole thing several times from beginning to end.
Yeah.
And we took the time. But yeah, it's. When was the last time you actually listened to a CD from beginning to end, or even to more than one movement, to a piece or symphony or something like this?
Okay, to be honest, for me, currently speaking, it's a time constraint thing. Well, when we had, and usually I'm too tired, so I fall asleep with my kid. But during the circuit breaker, this time last year, you know, when I did have time on my hands, it was a luxury.
I have the same experience, that basically because so much work was cancelled, for the first time I actually made an effort to repair my amplifier. I got my speakers going again, and I listened to CDs I bought 20, 30 years ago, or my family bought. And first time in probably 10 years that I listened to a whole CD.
Yeah, and it was glorious.
Yeah.
Really. And I mean, I haven't been able to listen to much these days, but I really miss actually circuit breaker this time last year, just sitting there, having my headphones on, and everything just got blocked out. So it was something to be appreciated, you know, despite everything. Yeah. And certain things, you know, brought me much closer to music again.
Was there also a time where you actually had a chance to spend more time with these babies, as you call them? No?
I mean, again, it is a commitment, because that means that I would have to get up even earlier than I do now.
Okay, because of your commitments to your child.
Yeah.
Yeah, I understand. But do you miss the performance life? Do you feel so because of your responsibilities as a teacher? Yeah.
I do, in a way. I do. But I mean, I still play occasionally when we're required to and all that, and I enjoy that process, because I enjoy. I need to remind myself of what the students are going through. But then again, in my early 20s, I did actually make the conscious decision not to be a performer in a way. Yeah. So, I mean, that's a different track altogether that I really wanted to go into teaching and to study much more about music. And then I did realize also that it didn't have to be one or the other. Yeah.
But in the end, you have a clear priority.
Right now, yeah.
Yeah, I understand, because I don't know, I always was suspicious about those famous pianists who have a professorship somewhere and they spend, I don't know, twice a year for 10 days in the actual building and see the students maybe 4 times a year. Of course, they can give you something through the performance experience.
Right.
The teacher you need to see every week can't. But on the other hand, you need that as well.
Yeah.
You need the commitment of the teacher to guide you, to be there, to watch your process. I didn't see that so much when I was a student, but I see it now.
Yeah. I mean, it's
hindsight.
not that I miss performance per se, but I miss the alone time with them babies. Yeah. That, that time to just sit down and to learn something. Because unfortunately, even if I did have to learn something now, it's a rushed job, and again, it's the process, and now I have to not say find time to speed up the process, but to build up more tripods to hold up the learning process, because now evidently I don't have so much time physically with the piano. How else can I learn it? So the process has changed in that sense as well.
So,
and I wish I had more time for the physical process. Yeah. But it's a lot more planning and self-understanding of your own technique and all that, and then coming here at the piano so that you can be a lot more effective.
Yeah. So it's the old story, as old as mankind. The youth is wasted on the young. It's the saying.
Yeah. So I tell my students now, it's like, okay, please do not be going out and having coffees all the time and all that. Yes, enjoy your freedom, but please use your time wisely. Learn your repertoire.
We'll never have this much time again.
No. Yeah.
Well, maybe we take this as a final comment to give something to the students who might be watching. I mean, it's an exciting profession. It has challenges. I think there's so many, on the other hand, so many common things we share with all other professions.
Yeah.
It's not that unique. It's not. In the end, we're all humans and have to make decisions about priorities, and have to find the best way for us to learn things.
Yeah.
And to embrace the process, not to be too fixed on the result. And not to take the good sides of what competition might bring into the game as a motivation, as an inspiration, and not let it drown you in the negative aspects.
Rightly said.
Thank you very much for taking the time, Nellie Seng, and thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.
Bye.